It's now after midnight. It's 12:30 here in Israel, and I just returned less than an hour ago from a wedding, and I was incredibly inspired to share with you a thought on this week's parashah, this week's Torah portion, and some thoughts that occurred to me tonight. And I hope you'll stay tuned to the very end, because this could be, I think, very powerful, this idea. The Torah portion this week speaks about the Jewish people who are really on the verge of entering the land of Israel. And they ask Moshe to send spies, and Moshe agrees, even though it appears that God does not really want them to send spies, but he allows them to. And the spies go and they come back and they give a report about the land of Israel, and the truth is, most of it is true, or all of it is true. But what they do, after reporting what it's like in the land, they say, we cannot do it. And Kalev and Joshua, they respond to these naysayers. Kalev says, and the verse tells us, Vayahas Kalev, and listen to that word, Vayahas. He silenced them, shh, Vayahas, the people. Vayomer, and he said, Alo na'aleh v'yarashnu otah. We can go up, we can do it. Ki yachol nuchala, it is possible. And they shout him down again, and then finally, what is the response again of Yoshua and Kalev? They say, Tova haaretz me'od me'od, that the land is outstanding. The land is excellent. But the spies win the day, and they, in the end, they convince the people that they're not going to be able to enter and conquer the land of Israel. And the people go back to their tents, and the people are crying to each other, and they're crying to Moses, you should have left us to Egypt to die, and perhaps it would even be better to die here in the desert. Why do we want to go there, and we're going to become slaves, or we're going to be slaughtered, and our wives are going to be taken captive, and our children, we don't want to go. And what happens? The people are crying. And the sages tell us that God said to the people, oh yeah, if you're going to cry now for no reason, because there was no reason, after all the miracles, they should have had faith that God can bring them into the land. If you're going to cry now for no reason, I will establish this day as a b'chiyah l'dorot, say the rabbis, as a day of crying throughout all the generations. And this is the day that becomes, on the Jewish calendar, the day of national tragedy, the day of Tish'a B'Av. That is when the story of the spies happened. Happens in the 9th day of Av, which is the day the first temple was destroyed, the day the second temple was destroyed. And that is the first day of Jewish tragedy, the 9th of Av, the spies convincing the people that we cannot go up to the land of Israel. And the Jews finally, this generation doesn't survive, but the next generation enters the land after 40 years of wandering. But you got to remember and think about this, hovering over their head is God's promise that this entry into the land is not going to last. There will be a b'chiyah l'dorot. That day, Tisha B'Av will once again become another day of tragedy. And even though they're in the land, hanging over their head is the notion of doom, that this period of the Jewish people in the land will come to an end. There will be another exile and a second one. And so they're in the land, and they build a temple. That temple is destroyed. They're exiled for 70 years. They build another one in 516. That one stands for 400 years and is destroyed in the year 70. And I want to share with you a very powerful story that the Talmud says at the end of Masechet Makot, Tractate Makot. It says that a number of rabbis, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, they were walking overlooking the Temple Mount, and they saw shualim, foxes, running through the Holy of Holies, and they all begin to weep, and Rabbi Akiva begins to laugh. And the rabbis look at Rabbi Akiva and say, why are you laughing? And they look at him, and Rabbi Akiva looks at them and says, why are you crying? And they say, why are we crying? The temple is in ruins. In the Holy of Holies, where the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, used to go once a year in Yom Kippur, there are foxes running through. How can we not cry? And Rabbi Akiva tells them, let me tell you why I'm laughing. He says, because the prophet says that one day the Beit HaMikdash will be destroyed. And now I see with my own eyes that that prophecy has come true. Every letter, every word of that prophecy is true. And therefore what? The second part of the prophecy must also be true. What does the second part of the prophecy say? Od yeshvu zkenim uzkenot b'Yerushalayim. Birchavot Yerushalayim. One day the elderly will sit once again on the streets of Yerushalayim, and the children will be playing. And then continues the prophet, Od Yishama Bi'arei Yehuda Uvechutzot Yerushalayim. Once again will be heard in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem, Kol Sason V'Kol Simcha, Kol Chatan V'Kol Kala, the voice of a bride, the voice of the groom, the voice of rejoicing at a wedding will once again be heard. And this will herald the redemption. Now I want to tell you something. When the rabbis heard Rabbi Akiva say this, they turned to Rabbi Akiva and they said, Akiva nichamtanu, Akiva nichamtanu, Akiva, you have given us great comfort. Because even in the darkest moment, the destruction of the temple, the greatest exile that the Jews faced, that we're now sitting 2,000 years after that, they exiled for 2,000 years, they knew that there was hope that we would return one day. So tonight, I was sitting in the Arei Yehuda. I was sitting in the cities of Judah. I was sitting at a place called Kibbutz Ramat Rachel, which is on the outskirts, what would have then been Jerusalem. Today it's part of Greater Jerusalem, but it's in the cities of Judah. And I sat there outside, and in front of me, maybe 5 yards, 10 yards in front of me, there was a chuppah, and under that chuppah stood a bride and a groom. And beyond them were the hills of Beit Lechem, where King David walked with his sheep. And as the rabbi recited the brachot for the wedding, and he said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech olam, and so on and so forth, and he said, Od Yishama Bi'arei Yehuda Uvechutzot Yerushalayim, once again will be heard in the cities of Judah, the sounds of the bride and the groom. And there was the bride and the groom. The prophecy unfolded before my eyes. And for those of us who were sitting there, and those of us living here in the land, we are living the prophecy. And you cannot help but literally be moved to tears when you're sitting at a wedding. And that was the promise of the prophet. And that's what brought Rabbi Akiva comfort 2,000 years ago. And as I sat there and I watched them, and I watched the sun setting behind them, there were tears rolling down my face. Tears of incredible joy. And the words of Kalev, when he says, Alo na'aleh, we can go up. Tova ha'aretz me'od me'od, this land is excellent. This land is very good. Were ringing in my ears from this week's parashah. And I hope, please God, that we'll celebrate together with the building of the Beit HaMikdash, building of the third temple here in Jerusalem, and the continuation of the prophecies. I invite all of you to join us here in the land of Israel. Come live here. Come visit here. And you too will see the prophets, the words of the prophets coming to life in the cities of Judah, which is where I am standing right now. I'm standing in the cities of Judah, in a place called Ephrat, in the hills of Judah. You are looking at a prophecy right before your very eyes. Shabbat Shalom.
Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return again, return again, return to the land of your soul. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Return to who you are, return to what you are, return to where you are, born and reborn again. Ve'ashev kohanim lavodatam uleviim לשירם, לשירם ולזמרם. והשב ישראל, והשב Yisra'el, V'Hashev Yisra'el li neven, V'Hashev Yisra'el, V'Hashev Yisra'el, V'Hashev